are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Welcome back to the Sense of Beer Style, everyone. We are going to talk about a really fun style. For those of you who, once upon a time, there was a day when I am team beer or I am team wine, and rarely shall the two cross. These days, we know that the share of mouth, if you like good things, we're drinking and enjoying it all. But it used to be where you were either a beer person or a wine person. But all of us who have been in the beer business or the wine business have known for a very long time that it takes a lot of beer to make wine. And I've had many winemakers tell me that. So it was only a matter of time before a winemaker said, "Hey, wait a minute. What if I put my wine in my beer?" and this is where, I don't know why it took so long, but in the 2000s in Italy, someone finally put out what they called a grape ale, and everyone scratched their head and then tasted it and applauded, because it's kind of, I don't want to say it's exploded because it's not everywhere, but there are a lot of breweries that are playing with the style, and it's really fun. So I've got a version from Good Life and Joe Dobbs Winery that I'm going to open up. But Julia, do you want to talk about the ingredients and what goes into this beautiful beer?
Sure, I'd be honored to. And I love that this style is an example of how, on the homebrew level, because Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines and the whole BJCP judge community is based on writing styles for homebrewers that then professional brewers obviously often also follow. And this style became popular because BJCP actually documented it in 2015. So BJCP style guidelines don't update every year. There are many other style guidelines that do. But BJCP style guidelines 2015 had a very deep dive of updates. And then 2021 guidelines are even more robust and expanded out. So in 2015, it was more about the local, and Jeremy referenced it, kind of the Italian grape ale version with a specific type of grapes. Now we have both, right? We actually have the style guideline X3 in 2021 guidelines. That's the Italian grape ale for that local version. And here we are in fruit beer category. This is the fourth subcategory within that of grape ale, because you can use any type of grape. But if you're using the Italian grape and how this whole style kind of really was documented, that's a different style, and that will be a different show. So with that precursor, just commonly, at least what success has found, so that's what's been documented in the style guidelines, is paler malts, Pilsner or pale malt base, maybe some crystal, maybe a little bit of wheat. Wheat commonly adds some more protein and nice coloriform retention and the like. And then a grape must, right? The must is a component of actually mashed and fermented grapes. They can be red, they can be white, but fresh must is a really good thing to use, and it's a big proportion of the style. The guidelines talk about 15 to 20%, can also be up to 40% of the grist. The grist is going to be your fermentables, so your grains. So 15 to 40% is often supplemented with grape must for this beer instead of 100% malted barley or the like. So that's a big differentiator. So it can be very dominant with the grape must, and you're fermenting the must with the beer. You're not blending. That would be a different approach, and it's qualify it under a different style. You're using different yeasts, right? There's no guidelines on which yeast to use. Fruity, spicy yeast, they say, are common. You could use neutral varieties that take more of a backdrop and aren't adding as much flavor of esters or phenols, but it's up to you. The hops are definitely really a not big component of this beer, going to be more to complement the beer. It's certainly as a preservative, might want some bitterness in there depending on who you are as the brewer. But really these styles, this style is about more the grape must and the flavors in concert with those, that grain bill, that grist over a hop profile of flavor and aroma. But we'll get to flavor in a minute,
Yeah.
although they do make a big note to say that this is not dry hopped. The last thing that's important, because as soon as you start talking grape, everyone's brain should be like, oh, is it oak aged? Is it barrel aged? So oaking is allowable, and we have to remember when we use oak or wood to influence beer, you can add it to stainless, right, through chips, spires, and the like, or you can add the liquid to a barrel that itself is the oak or wood. So oak, not barrel, but oak in either fashion is allowable, but it's not a required component of this beer.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I just want to reiterate. Julia, you nailed them perfectly, but it's important to make sure everyone knows that. So first of all, for those of you who have heard the term wine must for the first time, think of it as wine wort. It's all that unfermented grape juice and other before it's fermented. So just keep that straight. The other thing I want to make sure we're very, very clear on is this is not blended beer and wine. This is beer wort and wine must that has been mixed together and fermented together. So that's what makes it a grape ale, not a grape beer fusion to make everyone happy. So when we get to appearance, I try to keep my glass in frame for those of you who are watching, and those of you who are listening, I'll describe it. The colors for these beers are, the BJCP calls them pale to burgundy. This one, I would call this kind of like a dark rosé wine color. There's just a little bit of copper, just a little hint of rust color that's just kind of infiltrating in there and just kind of making it seem a little bit more brooding than normal. When we get to the foam color, I love this. It could be white, or we talk about white or off white all the time. Well, for this particular beer, I'm going to call it white to off red. You can get these pink tinge notes in your foam as well. But that foam is not going to stick around for a long time. It has a pretty medium to low retention. There's alcohol in there. There's other factors in there that just don't help with foam retention there. That's okay. That's normal. If you have a foamy grape ale, great, enjoy it, but it's not typical. We expect these to have pretty good clarity. They should never be hazy. They don't have to be brilliant. You don't have to be able to read a book through it, but clear is common for these. But while I start sniffing, talk to us about aroma.
Yeah, and I do love, I mean, grape is such an incredible fruit, depending especially on the types of grapes that you work with for aromatics. I mean, flavor aside, you get so much beauty, nuance, and poetry from the expression in the aroma, and volatile compounds from grapes. So once that must has been fermented and fermented it with your malted barley or grains, right? You're looking for characteristics of whatever varietal grape that you are using to be in the aroma. Like that's just number one to lead with. And yet it needs to be in concert. It shouldn't be all about those grapes. The guidelines say it should not dominate, and I agree with that. And so you want it to meld and kind of be in harmony. And then I talked about the hops, so I don't need to belabor it, but in the aroma to reinforce, you're usually going to see restrained hopping, which I think is a good way to put it. Medium low to entirely absent is exactly what the style guidelines allow for. And I like the way that's verbalized. And then fermentation from whatever yeast you've chosen to use is going to have really neutral and no characteristics from the yeast to spicy, fruity esters, depending on which yeast you as the brewer or the brewer that you are enjoying their beverage chose which yeast they chose. But the guidelines do make a note if you're using kind of Hefeweizen yeast, which is kind of its own specific type of ale yeast, you're not looking for banana bubblegum. You don't want a lot of isoamyl expression. You don't want a lot of advanced esters, and that's what bubblegum can denote. So those are considered faults if you do have those showing up in the aroma.
Yeah. So when we get to flavor, this is really fun because you kind of need a beer expert and a wine expert to sit down to really break this down. I am not a wine expert. I don't even play one on TV. Have not been invited to play one on TV. So for now, this is what you get. But there are a lot of books and wonderful apps that you can look up and understand the grape varietal, but we are going to get a huge range of a low to moderately high grape varietal character. The flavors that come out of that will be appropriate to that grape varietal. And so we have to do a little bit of research on that one. This one happens to be Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir from California is different from Pinot Noir from Oregon. And so even that whole terroir is going to change things up a little bit. The malt in this beer, they don't even describe if it's low or medium or whatever in the guidelines. It just says malt is a supportive vehicle. It is a solid foundation that shouldn't have too much character, but it should just be ever present. It's like you'd notice it if it were gone. They do go so far to say that you can have some really low, pale crystal malts. That's okay, but it's got to be pale, low level bond, 40, maybe 60 at the tops, I'm guessing. But there should never be any roast character. There should never be any chocolate malt or darker malts in there because that's a different kind of beer and different kind of flavor profile. The bitterness in this ought to be low. It's not about the hops. This is all about letting that collaboration between wine and beer shine. So it's not. I would be shocked if I saw an IPA version of a grape ale because that's kind of not the point, and it's just too conflicting. When we get to hop flavor, should be low, if at all. Again, it's there for a preservative, there to balance, but not to rear its bitter head. It talks about having a light tartness because we're adding fruit. You get a little bit of tartness with fruit oftentimes, but it shouldn't be a sour. That becomes a sour ale at that point. Joy, you mentioned this. Oak is okay. This is interesting because it says there should never be Brettanomyces myces in this beer. But however, this sample that I have from Good Life Brewing is a fantastic brewery from Ben and a fantastic beer. It does have some bread in it. So again, it's a guideline, not a strict rule that we must adhere to from according to the beer police. So just keep in mind that there is some interpretation. But having that clean fermentation, you mentioned having some, we can get some phenols and esters that come through this, perhaps, if it's more of a Belgian style beer. I don't expect any of that the German Weiss beer with the banana clove through there. That is pretty uncommon from my understanding of all this stuff. So all that said, that's kind of like a typical, smack dab middle bullseye of what this larger grape ale style is. How does mouthfeel play out?
And I look forward to doing mouthfeel. I don't want to distract, but we could talk about the beer example you have that if it's got fruit and it's got Brett, meaning grape at least, it
Yeah,
would boot it then to likely into the wild specialty beer category
yeah, could be.
or could be discussed and dissected to enter into a different style. So that's not definitive, but there's always potentially another style when you get like a lot of components that a catch-all category is not going to cover.
Well,
So
that's just a quick interjection. That's the pros and cons of the BJCP is that they get
yes.
very, very, very specific, and I love that because that's why we use this to help teach and learn from because we get really hyper specific on the beer style. But if we were judging this, it would probably be lumped into a larger category just for the sake of the number of entrants. So it's 601.
Depends on how it was entered, depends how it's presented to you as
Yeah,
the judge.
yeah.
So I knew that would maybe derail just a touch, but worth talking about. So back to mouthfeel, back to the regularly scheduled show in progress. And so mouthfeel for these grape ales, first of all, because it is influenced from wine and I love it, but maybe even the champagne side, I don't know. Or at least the Beerifico who created this style in the early 2000s, they probably had a very, high carbonated beer. So medium high to high carbonation is what you're looking for in mouthfeel. And I like that. It's going to create this sessionability. And yet the body should be low to medium called by the style guidelines. Also, to denote acidity, which will affect the mouthfeel, you're often going to have acidity from grapes that don't aren't brought to the table from other fruits added. So acidity at least can contribute to more of that dryness, more of that refreshment. And I love that. And they're looking for, if you're doing true examples of the style, exceedingly quote unquote dry and crisp, right? So you've got medium high to high carbonation, you've got some acidity, and that's really fun because these could be really refreshing beers served at the beginning of the meal, even throughout the meal, to really help refresh the palate. And so you also do allow the guidelines, at least for strong examples. But to me, the examples that I've come across and seen are more about the refreshment factor. Then going into style comparison, this is going to be an easier style to taste blind against other styles, right? The guidelines don't, I think, have much to go on to give you something that's very similar. Jeremy and I, one of our favorite sayings is sister, from another mister, brother from another mother. There's like not styles that I can think of, or the guidelines list, that really just slip you into that place of like, if you were blind tasting, you'd be struggling, because it stands alone in the possibilities of grape ale, not comparable to most other styles. So it's almost like they suggest base styles when you read the guidelines for comparative level of intensity and weight, right? Belgian styles like Belgian Blonde, Saison, and Belgian Single, but with grapes, right? Okay, sure, but that's not a very hard test. If you tried any of those blind, but then you had a grape ale, you'd know which one that was grape ale. Then they talk about higher strength examples, similar to Belgian Triple or Belgian Golden Strong, but with grapes. So you kind of get my point in the way I've queued that up. It's not really a fun or hard contest, but that's okay. It always can't be tough, and that's nice. But they do emphasize, and Jeremy was talking about no Brett, so you don't want the wild side, no funky, and you certainly wouldn't have it taste like a fruit lambic. You could test it and taste it like next to a fruit lambic, but you should very easily be able to discern the difference.
So when we get to classic examples, I mean, there are not a lot of these out there, but there are a lot of breweries that are playing with this style, so it's super fun. But some of the ones that kind of originated and got us there is the and I'm going to do my best at pronunciation, but the Montegioco Open Mind, the Beneficio del Forte, Lupalaggio Mons Brewis, and the Four Arvores Abundanza. But of course, with some of our American breweries that are doing some incredible national work with the Midas touch on any beer they brew. We've got Firestone Walker with Feral Vinifera, and Freem Family Brewers with their Druif as well. Those are the ones that are listed on the guidelines as great examples of this style. So if you can find those, great. If you can brew them, even better. But look to your local brewer and say, hey, let's give this a try. It's really fun. What about Vital Stats?
Great pronunciations there. Better you than me. Thank you. And so on to vitals. There's a vision behind this. This isn't just like the kitchen sink grape ale, right? There is a vision. So 1059 to 1075 original gravity. So that's showing you some potential for a little bit more alcohol than some of the styles. And final gravity, though, is getting us to that low drier level, but then they're also allowing for residual sugar. Final gravity would be 10004 to 1013. Wow, that's a big range. 10004 is really getting dry. It's
Really
not
dry.
bone dry though, but 1013 definitely has residual sweetness. So that gives us alcohol by volume levels of 6% to 8.5%, right? So kind of pretty sessionable. To 8.5% is like, oh, you're maybe counting your beers a little bit more. And then international bitterness units, 10 to 30. That's a broader range, barely discernible at 10 BUs to 30 is you certainly have bitterness that you're going to notice. Standard reference method of 4 to 8. That's kind of random, I think, because the standard reference method can't account for color that's going to be attributed by these grapes.
No.
So I think we should have done better there on the style guidelines. Then again, I'm not one of the sweet, wonderful people that are writing them. And then, right, Jeremy, you double it for European Brewing Convention. So that would be
Yep.
8 to 16 for European
Yep.
Brewing Convention, with big old grain of salt there in the SRM or the EBC.
Yeah, and really the color scale SRM and EBC refers to malt color. So when you add fruit to it,
Yes.
you add wine must to or grape must to it. Uh, yeah, just throw it out. Don't just disregard it completely. If you're a Plato person, for the original gravity, we're looking about 14 to 18 Plato, original Plato, and that's going to attenuate all the way down to about 1 to 3 Plato. So I mean that's quite a range. These yeast are doing an excellent job. How about beer glasses or glasses for this? This should be fun.
Yeah, I'm going to take the cheat. I do it sometimes. It's just too variable. Is there which fruit, right, or which grape, which type of grape? How intense is the beer, right? Is it 6%? Is it that 8.5%? Was it oaked? Was it not? So go forth, conquer, try everything in any type of glass and switch it up if you feel like things are too muted. Temperature wise, though, because of that desirable refreshment factor, because of it's not a bomb in alcohol. I mean, frankly, most wines these days are 12 to 14%, right? This is only 6 to 8.5%. So I think temperature wise, I want this colder because it's supposed to be a medium high to high carbonated beer, as we said, and about the refreshment and the dry finish. So I want this colder. I want it straight out of the fridge temperatures. I don't want it warmer. Although when it warms up, I might get to know it better and see things that I didn't notice when it was too cold.
Yeah. And from my standpoint with glassware, it's like, we have this really wonderful, interesting kind of fancy beer. Let's put it in a fancy glass. Julia, you use your Teku glass all the time. That'd be perfect. A stemmed tulip would be perfect. Happen to have, or frankly, even a wine glass would be perfect for this beer. This one happens to be a great beer glass from the Feldschlossen Brewery in Switzerland. That's basically a wine glass with just a little flare in the rim, and that just makes it perfect for this kind of beer. Do something a little bit special for this special beer. When it comes to pairing, it really depends on the beer style. It really depends on the grape varietal. One thing is not going to be catch-all. So play with this a little bit. But for my money, generally, I love to have some meat dishes. If it's a red varietal, pasta is going to be a no-brainer with this. Some wonderful cheeses is really going to delight. And for those of you who don't eat meat out there or purely vegan, well, this is an Italian Grape Ale. So let's have an Italian veggie dish called the griglia verdure misti. And that's basically you take grilled vegetables, olive oil, salt, pepper, and some herbs. You grill them and you eat them, and it is absolutely delicious, especially with this. Where would you go, Julia?
Yeah, again, I feel there. It's like saying, what would you pair with wine? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even talking Italian Grape Ale. We're not even talking that varietal here.
Yep.
So I do not feel it's fair in this show to say anything but go out and flip and have fun and pair on and go for intensity matches. Look for those bridges, links, and hooks and echoes in whatever grape was used in the beer, accounting for what base style and other components of the grist and the malt that were used, so you can have some synergies in what you're pairing. I'm totally going to cheat and do that because this is such a broad spectrum of allowable flavor ranges that it just doesn't seem fair. But what Jeremy said, I don't need to add to it because I totally want to try that no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, this is a special beer. I hope you find it. I hope you enjoy it and go out and enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers. Be well, everybody.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.